The year was 1015. 48,000 pounds of extremely pure silver sat securely locked inside the fortified Royal English Treasury vaults. 10,000 highly trained Viking mercenaries sailed toward the wealthiest and most sophisticated kingdom in all of medieval Europe. The price of peace was officially paid. Political strategists of the medieval era all agreed. That massive mountain of silver would permanently keep the brutal northern invaders away from their fragile shores forever. But the silver did not buy peace. It bought exactly 200 massive warships. During the next 14 exhausting months, the most sophisticated administrative state in the entire medieval world completely collapsed. The supreme monarch of the English realm lay hiding inside his stone capital, completely paralyzed by psychological terror. And then he died. But across the shattered English countryside, one of the darkest political betrayals in human history was being constructed. An influential English nobleman deliberately shattered his own royal defensive army directly in front of the advancing enemy. A massive, wealthy kingdom ultimately surrendered its entire historical future to the command of an exiled teenage prince. This was the catastrophic Danish conquest of England, where a desperate empire inadvertently purchased its own violent destruction. And the terrifying betrayal of a trusted English nobleman together changed the geopolitical map of Northern Europe forever. To fully comprehend why this historical conflict permanently altered European history, we must first examine the economics. During the late 10th century, the wealthy Kingdom of England was undeniably the most prosperous European nation. The English possessed a remarkably sophisticated administrative infrastructure and highly secure facilities for minting pure silver coins. This unprecedented financial prosperity tragically transformed the peaceful agricultural island into an irresistible target for northern raiders. Scandinavian warlords quickly realized that threatening the English crown was significantly more profitable than domestic agricultural farming. For several agonizing decades, desperate English monarchs foolishly attempted to purchase permanent peace using their immense wealth. This highly controversial defensive strategy was historically documented as the Danegeld, representing a catastrophic geopolitical sovereign miscalculation. The terrified English royal council genuinely believed that physically paying the formidable Vikings would permanently satisfy them. They desperately assumed that trading heavy wooden chests containing pure silver would seamlessly prevent tragic burning settlements. But this desperate defensive assumption completely violated the most fundamental core principles governing basic military economic strategy. Instead of successfully preventing future aggressive incursions, the massive silver payments actively subsidized the rapid enemy expansion. English silver directly financed the continuous construction of significantly larger ships alongside increasingly sophisticated professional northern armies. King Æthelred miserably found himself permanently trapped within a terrifyingly vicious cycle, characterizing his disastrous financial policymaking. His national defense completely relied upon continuous economic appeasement, but appeasement merely guarantees that empowered enemies return. They fundamentally transformed brutal military extortion into a highly predictable and incredibly lucrative seasonal business for warriors. Hard-working English agricultural peasants were heavily taxed by corrupt royal administrators, simply to essentially fund advancing invaders. Every single pound of pure silver transferred to the Scandinavian warlords represented stolen food from native families. The terrified peasant population systematically lost their complete faith regarding the fundamental protective capabilities of their monarch. Meanwhile, across the turbulent Northern Ocean, the massive influx of English wealth fundamentally transformed the Scandinavian economy. Disorganized tribal raiding parties progressively evolved into highly structured professional mercenary armies motivated by guaranteed lucrative contracts. By the fateful year 1013, the formidable King Sweyn Forkbeard aggressively utilized this exact extracted wealth. Sweyn successfully forced the cowardly King Æthelred into miserable exile and violently claimed the contested English throne. The vast, productive agricultural territories of the English realm suddenly found themselves completely subjugated under foreign banners. This sudden political collapse perfectly demonstrated the absolute fragility characterizing kingdoms relying exclusively upon endless financial appeasement. You simply cannot sustainably defend a massive geographical territory by constantly writing diplomatic ransom checks toward aggressors. Sweyn brought alongside him his highly observant teenage son, a remarkably ambitious young Scandinavian prince named Canute. This young prince watched carefully as his father systematically dismantled the sophisticated administrative infrastructure across the nation. He practically learned exactly how a decentralized military force could successfully subjugate an extensively fortified modern kingdom. The Danish invaders established heavily fortified military encampments directly across the most prosperous southern English agricultural territories. They systematically extracted even more valuable financial resources from the completely defeated local native Anglo-Saxon populations. But the unstoppable momentum of historical conquest is rarely a perfectly straight line drawn across physical maps. In early 1014, King Sweyn suddenly and inexplicably perished, leaving the massive invasion force without leadership. The powerful northern monarch who had brilliantly conquered an entire nation was swiftly defeated by biological failure. His sudden unexpected death immediately created a massive political vacuum that sent devastating shockwaves throughout the kingdom. The carefully constructed Danish military coalition immediately fractured into multiple disorganized factions without clear, centralized leadership direction. The young Prince Canute was suddenly forced to immediately abandon his territorial gains and urgently retreat northward. King Æthelred quickly returned from his shameful Norman exile, falsely promising his weary subjects much better governance. The English military forces swiftly mobilized again, creating a temporary illusion that the terrifying threat was neutralized. The previously defeated English aristocrats aggressively pursued the retreating Danish forces, eager to exact brutal, bloody vengeance. They fiercely believed that the devastating Scandinavian threat was permanently eradicated from their highly vulnerable island kingdom. But their premature celebrations were fundamentally based upon a completely inaccurate understanding of Northern European geopolitical realities. They falsely assumed that the young teenage prince lacked the necessary political authority to continuously maintain warfare. They drastically underestimated the immense organizational capabilities possessed by a highly educated commander, driven by mathematical logic. When Canute successfully navigated his remaining fleet backward, he did not permanently accept a humiliating strategic defeat. He strategically retreated to meticulously construct a significantly larger invasion force that would completely overwhelm English defenses. An ordinary prideful warrior would have foolishly chosen to stubbornly fight a completely hopeless defensive military battle. But Canute operated purely upon the cold mathematical logic defining warfare, rather than emotional impulsivity and vengeance. He quickly ordered his remaining longships to immediately abandon English shores, and rapidly sailed toward Danish territories. Before completely departing the English coastline, Cnut permanently abandoned the aristocratic hostages his father had previously secured. He ruthlessly mutilated these high-ranking noblemen, strategically leaving them scattered across freezing beaches for public discovery. This horrific political action was not a senseless expression of youthful rage, but a meticulously calculated statement. It clearly demonstrated to the celebrating English nobility that his calculated strategic withdrawal was absolutely not surrender. It was a terrifyingly clear diplomatic promise that the formidable Danish military machine would eventually return forcefully. Back in Denmark, Canute approached his ruling brother and strategically requested absolute administrative control over military operations. He successfully negotiated a massive mobilization of continental resources requiring the absolute centralization of the Scandinavian economy. He actively dispatched numerous diplomatic envoys across the entire Scandinavian peninsula, seeking experienced, dangerous professional mercenary warriors. He actively promised these battle-hardened veterans an unprecedented financial share of the legendary English agricultural wealth. The traditional political structure characterizing the Viking world was heavily fragmented across numerous independent, fiercely competing warlords. Cnut brilliantly utilized his promised financial rewards to successfully unify these disparate warring factions into cohesive armies. He effectively transformed a loosely connected network containing independent maritime raiders into a highly disciplined professional organization. The immense logistical requirements for adequately supplying this rapidly expanding military force immediately created an unprecedented strain. Thousands of skilled blacksmiths worked continuously throughout the freezing winter months, forging thousands of highly durable weapons. The massive national effort required to fully equip this formidable army fundamentally altered the traditional economic structures. The young prince was quietly building an absolutely unstoppable logistical machine designed strictly for crushing administrative states. For an entire calendar year, the freezing shores of Denmark fundamentally transformed into Europe's largest naval shipyard. This was the exact historical moment where the cold mathematics governing medieval warfare truly demonstrated their reality. To permanently conquer England, Canute desperately needed an army capable of overpowering numerous heavily fortified stone towns. He required a military force so overwhelmingly massive that it could independently sustain multiple protracted regional sieges. Historical academic archives strongly suggest he successfully assembled an intimidating armada containing approximately 200 advanced longships. Each individual vessel required immense quantities of carefully treated timber, alongside specialized iron rivets and durable sails. Building a single highly functional Viking longship required the focused daily physical labor from dozens of craftsmen. Constructing 200 massive vessels demanded the completely synchronized industrial economic output from an entire Scandinavian nation. Skilled Scandinavian workers precisely shaped massive oak timbers, binding them securely together using thousands of forged rivets. They extracted astronomical quantities of thick, dark pine tar to properly waterproof wooden hulls against freezing oceans. Thousands of domestic sheep were carefully, systematically sheared to effectively produce the extremely heavy woolen navigational sails. The underlying physical mathematics involved during constructing this massive naval fleet simply stagger modern historical imaginations today. A single standard operational longship typically required the selective manual felling of approximately 10 massive mature oaks. Therefore, constructing the entire invasion fleet necessitated the systematic complete deforestation across vast, prime Scandinavian coastal woodlands. Producing a single durable woolen sail required the intensive simultaneous shearing from approximately 200 adult sheep. Equipping 200 formidable warships demanded the synchronized agricultural economic output from numerous completely unified farming communities. But successfully constructing the physical wooden vessels was merely the first introductory phase inside this logistical nightmare. A massive naval fleet of this completely unprecedented magnitude required roughly 10,000 heavily armed combat soldiers. 10,000 constantly hungry men required an astronomical massive amount of preserved agricultural food alongside fresh water. They desperately needed thousands of specialized iron weapons, protective chainmail shirts, forged helmets, and carefully constructed shields. A standard chainmail shirt contained thousands of individually riveted iron rings, weighing roughly 30 pounds of burden. Equipping 10,000 professional soldiers with high-quality protective gear demanded the total exhaustion of available iron. Where exactly did a temporarily displaced teenage prince acquire the necessary massive financial resources for this buildup? He brilliantly utilized the exact same silver that terrified English taxpayers had desperately surrendered during previous decades. The infamous English Danegeld had inadvertently created a highly centralized Scandinavian economy, completely capable of sustaining war. The terrified English effectively financed the precise technological instruments that would eventually permanently conquer their own nation. Every single silver coin previously paid avoiding violent conflict was ultimately successfully melted down, forging sharper swords. By the summer of 1015, the most formidable maritime invasion force ever assembled launched toward England. In early September 1015, the massive Danish armada successfully navigated the treacherous seasonal currents across oceans. They aggressively landed upon the vulnerable shores of Wessex, immediately securing a remarkably vital tactical southern foothold. The vast geographical physical reality of southern England presented a massive logistical challenge for invading terrestrial armies. Traditional medieval armies heavily relied upon established Roman road networks, moving incredibly slowly, dragging massive supply wagons. This traditional logistical approach essentially provided defending nations ample valuable time to comfortably assemble localized military resistance. However, Cnut brilliantly weaponized the natural aquatic geographic environment to effectively bypass traditional terrestrial obstacles and fortifications. Viking longships were profound maritime engineering marvels designed featuring incredibly shallow drafts, allowing navigation through inland rivers. These remarkably versatile wooden vessels could effortlessly travel across open oceans and seamlessly transition into narrow waterways. Cnut did not march his massive army strictly across the heavily defended and exhausting muddy inland roads. He efficiently sailed his terrifying war machine directly up the winding river networks, striking deeply without warning. By effectively utilizing winding rivers as rapid transportation highways, the Danish forces completely outmaneuvered slower English defenders. This strategic maritime operational mobility fundamentally shifted the tactical advantage, allowing Canute to deliberately choose specific battlefields. The English defensive military response was completely paralyzed by a devastating combination of profound internal political corruption. The vast administrative bureaucratic structure of the kingdom was deeply fractured by intense rivalries among powerful noblemen. King Æthelred remained securely hidden away inside London, heavily crippled by a debilitating illness and deep paranoia. He fundamentally distrusted his own aristocratic noblemen. constantly fearing internal betrayal significantly more than the approaching enemy. He stubbornly, absolutely refused to personally command the royal armies, deeply terrified that his generals desired assassination. The immense, heavy responsibility of actively defending the deeply fractured realm ultimately fell upon his resilient son. Prince Edmund Ironside was essentially everything his cowardly royal father was not: physically imposing, decisive, and inspiring. Edmund truly deeply understood the brutal, uncompromising realities governing defensive warfare and explicitly refused surrendering his homeland. He explicitly recognized that sitting passively behind protective stone walls would only grant the Danish army dominance. If the foreign invaders were permitted continuous, undisturbed control across the countryside, fortified cities would eventually starve. He desperately rode across the deeply fractured English territories, forcefully rallying local militias and assembling motivated resistance. He successfully utilized his natural charismatic leadership to temporarily, successfully unite deeply divided regional factions against enemies. Canute aggressively, constantly sought a massive, decisive military confrontation, hoping to completely crush the English resistance immediately. But Prince Edmund deliberately, strategically avoided offering the invaders the massive set-piece battle they desperately required. Edmund aggressively adopted highly mobile, unconventional guerrilla tactics, typically associated with traditional raiding strategies from previous Vikings. He continuously launched swift, devastating cavalry counterattacks against isolated Danish contingents before rapidly retreating into dense forests. This specific, strategic, unconventional approach effectively transformed the invasion into a deeply frustrating, exhausting logistical nightmare continuously. It was a grueling, agonizing conflict, primarily determined by physical endurance, logistical sustainability, and harsh winter realities. To truly deeply comprehend the absolute severity characterizing this historical campaign, we must carefully examine micro levels. Imagine standing nervously inside a freezing English marshland during the darkest, coldest months, characterizing the medieval winter. Your worn leather military boots are completely saturated with freezing, muddy water that dangerously threatens permanent frostbite. You are physically, constantly carrying approximately 30 pounds of heavy iron equipment while marching across uneven terrain. Your daily nutritional caloric intake is severely restricted because opposing military forces actively depleted local agricultural supplies. Both rival commanders aggressively authorized the systematic burning of civilian farmlands, deliberately starving their heavily armed opponents. This devastating scorched earth policy rapidly transformed the prosperous English countryside into a deeply horrifying, starved landscape. Deadly, invisible, contagious diseases rapidly spread through both encampments, silently eliminating significantly more soldiers than physical combat. Severe dysentery heavily contaminated the vital drinking water supplies, quickly turning military camps into dangerous biological zones. Yet amidst this overwhelming physical, biological misery, Cnut maintained absolute disciplinary control over his diverse mercenary coalition. He established extremely strict operational guidelines and promised unprecedented financial rewards for maintaining unwavering battlefield loyalty. But the absolutely greatest threat to Prince Edmund's survival was not the devastating physical winter toll. It was the deeply poisonous and heavily treacherous political environment festering quietly within his aristocratic royal council. Enter a highly prominent nobleman named Eadric Streona, representing the ultimate highly opportunistic and manipulative political survivor. Eadric was a remarkably manipulative individual whose personal loyalty consistently extended only toward his immediate physical survival. When he initially witnessed the terrifying massive scale of Cnut's professional army, Eadric made a devastating decision. Taking 40 massive ships completely equipped with highly trained English warriors, Eadric Streona defected toward Danish forces. This catastrophic internal political betrayal fundamentally shattered the defensive capabilities of the English crown and spread terror. The tactical military situation quickly evolved into a brutal mathematical contest, measuring physical endurance, logistics, and willpower. Cnut successfully laid a heavy, protracted siege against the highly strategic capital city of London during spring. London was absolutely crucially important because it successfully controlled the vital economic trade routes along the Thames. Cnut physically incredibly dragged his heavy wooden longships completely around the fortified London Bridge through artificial canals. This stunning logistical feat of advanced military engineering perfectly demonstrated the extraordinary versatility characterizing the Danish invasion. Thousands of professional soldiers meticulously excavated tons of freezing mud, successfully maneuvering formidable warships into strategic positions. However, London's remarkably towering stone defensive walls and fiercely resilient civilian defenders absolutely refused crumbling under pressure. While Canute remained firmly anchored directly outside the capital, Edmund brilliantly raised several fresh Western armies. In April of that highly monumental historical year, King Æthelred finally succumbed to his chronic illnesses inside. The desperate, trapped citizens of London immediately officially proclaimed the fierce Prince Edmund as their rightful sovereign. Edmund fiercely immediately engaged the opposing Danish forces across 5 major pitched battles throughout the exhausting summer. In traditional medieval military tactical terms, a massive pitched battle is an incredibly dangerous gamble risking destruction. Commanders generally avoided massive direct open confrontations because losing a single afternoon could easily cost their kingdom. But Edmund possessed virtually absolutely no other viable strategic options if he wanted decisively breaking the stranglehold. The brutal physical realities characterizing these massive medieval battlefield engagements completely defy modern romanticized cinematic warfare interpretations. The heavy interlocking iron chainmail worn by elite medieval soldiers weighed roughly 30 pounds, becoming severely crushing. After several agonizing hours of brutal hand-to-hand physical combat, exhaustion tragically claimed more victims than swords. Professional soldiers frequently collapsed directly into the muddy terrain, their lungs completely failing under immense physiological stress. Both massive professional armies were slowly bleeding to death, rapidly depleting their essential supplies and experienced veterans. The freezing winter season was rapidly approaching, acting as a massive, unforgiving mathematical timer for both forces. Cnut knew perfectly well his exhausted men could not safely survive another freezing winter encamped within territory. He absolutely desperately needed to secure a completely decisive military victory before his fragile mercenary coalition fractured. Edmund precisely knew his heavily taxed kingdom could not sustain the massive economic burden of continuous warfare. The English agricultural economic infrastructure was completely devastated, deeply threatening massive civilian starvation if brutal conflicts continued. By late October, the continuous aggressive marching and counter-marching had brought both armies toward physical limits. Cnut's professional forces were actively raiding directly through Essex, completely loading their ships with stolen agricultural wealth. Edmund Ironside strategically intercepted them, forcefully blocking their crucially important geographical path toward their anchored naval vessels. He essentially forcefully forced the ultimate, completely unavoidable military confrontation that would permanently decide the kingdom's fate. Everything ultimately, unfortunately, converged upon a relatively obscure geographical location, historically known today as muddy Assandun fields. There was absolutely no more available silver left within the national treasury, effectively purchasing temporary diplomatic peace. There was absolutely no more secure territory left for either exhausted army safely retreating without facing starvation. October 18th, 1016, became the absolute final bloody climax, characterizing a deeply agonizing multi-generational struggle. The impending final bloody confrontation was absolutely no longer just a tactical engagement, but absolute survival struggle. Cnut's professional combat forces were carefully positioned upon elevated ground, actively utilizing the natural sloping terrain advantage. Edmund successfully commanded a massive, highly motivated English army, absolutely determined, completely driving the foreign invaders away. The profound psychological combat pressure surrounding this specific battlefield was completely immeasurable for every single involved soldier. The horrifying sound generated from thousands of completely exhausted men continuously screaming echoed across the entire valley. Blood rapidly mixed with the freezing, muddy soil, completely destroying any remaining physical traction for advancing infantry. Heavily armored professional warriors frequently slipped directly beneath the absolutely crushing weight of advancing friendly shield walls. Once a medieval soldier completely lost his physical footing during these massive engagements, survival became absolutely impossible. The sheer physical mechanical pressure generated by thousands of pushing bodies literally crushed heavily armored men completely. The intense physical battle officially began with a completely deafening clash from interlocking massive wooden painted shields. The standard tactical military doctrine characterizing the 11th century fundamentally relied upon brutal mechanics of shield walls. Thousands of heavily armored men tightly pressed their painted wooden shields together, creating massive, impenetrable timber walls. When two massively opposing shield walls finally crashed against each other, the immense physical compression crushed lungs. For many grueling, agonizing hours, the opposing military formations violently pushed against each other, demanding horrifying endurance. Edmund Ironside courageously positioned himself directly within the center, desperately attempting successfully maintaining essential structural formation integrity. He was fighting remarkably brilliantly, slowly but surely pushing the highly veteran Danish forces backward across mud. It genuinely practically appeared that the immense physical courage of the young English king would successfully break. But human history is rarely decided purely by military courage alone. It is frequently decided by betrayal. The darkest, treacherous shadow characterizing internal English politics suddenly intervened, permanently changing established medieval European historical maps. Eadric Streona, the notorious aristocratic traitor who had previously returned toward the English side, commanded a flank. At the absolute terrifying peak of the violent physical struggle, just as Danish defensive lines seemed vulnerable, Eadric Streona suddenly acted decisively with completely devastating precision, fundamentally destroying the entire defensive English operational structure. Without issuing any prior recognizable warning, Eadric deliberately ordered his massive contingent, completely abandoning the active battlefield. He suddenly rapidly withdrew his highly trained troops during the most critical moment, retreating toward adjacent forests. This sudden, horrifying political betrayal instantly shattered the fundamental structural integrity characterizing King Edmund's carefully organized front line. The profound psychological shock from witnessing thousands of Allied soldiers actively fleeing immediately destroyed remaining defensive morale. A massively fatal physical gap violently opened directly within the English formation, exposing their highly vulnerable center. Cnut flawlessly completely recognized this catastrophic structural failure and immediately ordered his elite combat reserves exploiting gaps. The highly disciplined Danish forces rapidly and ruthlessly overwhelmed the increasingly desperate and completely disorganized English defenders. Countless brave native defenders tragically perished throughout the chaotic retreat, their bodies completely disappearing beneath muddy soil. Edmund Ironside miraculously managed physically surviving the horrific battlefield catastrophe, successfully escaping the catastrophic final defeat alive. Following the devastating total catastrophe at Assandun, Edmund clearly recognized his military capacity for absolute victory vanished. They officially agreed peacefully dividing the remarkably vast, wealthy English kingdom into two distinctly separate autonomous regions. Just one remarkably brief month after officially signing the historic territorial agreement, King Edmund Ironside suddenly passed. Without successfully fighting another major bloody battlefield engagement, the 20-year-old Danish prince officially became king. The Danish conquest of medieval England absolutely did not destroy the nation. Ironically, it successfully integrated it. Shortly after successfully securing the permanent absolute English throne, Cnut explicitly ordered Eadric Streona completely executing immediately. The brave English combat soldiers who bravely perished in the freezing autumn mud did not lose today. They fundamentally completely lost their beloved homeland many years earlier when their terrified political leaders decided appeasement. In the brutal, uncompromising arithmetic characterizing human history, a wealthy kingdom unwilling adequately properly defending itself falls. A brilliant 19-year-old Scandinavian prince completely dismantled a powerful kingdom that accidentally funded its destruction. He expertly, systematically turned the immense financial wealth of his greatest enemies into the very naval ships. Those exact same massive wooden naval ships successfully, forever, permanently secured his incredibly legendary, historical royal name. He powerfully, completely proved that the absolutely most terrifying, powerful weapon any ambitious conqueror can practically possess. It is absolutely, deeply, fundamentally the profound, extraordinary strategic capability, seamlessly adapting perfectly toward continuously shifting circumstances. Thank you immensely, deeply, for thoroughly watching and carefully listening toward this profound, deep, historical, strategic analysis. We will enthusiastically, continually continue exploring the highly fascinating mathematical and logistical geopolitical realities shaping great conflicts.